I've heard you tell the testimony of how you were contemplating taking your own life.
Mm-hmm. That's where you want me to start? Okay. I came up with a plan. And so then before I was going through with that, I said, I haven't been in touch with my mother in a long time. I better call my mother. And I called my mother. She answers the phone. She goes, well, I'm worried for your life. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I think someone's trying to kill you.
I've heard the saying at the depression anxiety program, we love you until you can learn to love yourself. And so many times when people go to self-medication because of trauma, there's feelings of guilt and shame that come with that.
God knows everything about your creation, all your flawed genetics. He knows everything about what you think, whether it's good or bad. He knows where you've been, and it's not been good places. And yet with all that, he still has precious thoughts towards you.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the love of God, really. We want to represent God as a loving father, not as an abusive, manipulative, exploitive father. And I think that's the problem in Christianity today.
There's been a lot of shaming for those types of activities that people go to for self-medication. But in reality, if you go to the why, like you said, it's really a cry for help.
And it's pain.
It's pain.
It's pain, and it's shame, and it's guilt. Turn the anger over to the sanctuary system. Turn it over to where God can handle it. He doesn't minimize what's making you angry. He doesn't say it's not important.
Sure.
He has a whole system to work on it. Hope is made up of two things. It's the will to live, and it's the way to live. And you may not have the will to live, but someone else loves you, and maybe you don't even know. And if you don't know, I'll tell you this, God loves you for sure.
We're joined today by Pastor Don Mackintosh, senior pastor of the Weimar University Church and a registered nurse. He's also professor of religion here at Weimar University, director of the health program, author of numerous books, and chaplain of the Nedley Depression Anxiety program here on campus. Pastor Don, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're here talking about trauma, depression, and anxiety. And the question many people are quietly asking, is there a way out? Let's start with your own experience. I've heard you tell your testimony of how you were contemplating taking your own life.
Mm-hmm. That's where you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it's important to start when you're dealing with people that have depression and anxieties. They know you can identify with them somewhat. So a lot of the people in our program have been through the program before they worked in the program. That's our workers. And they all have their stories, as I'm sure many people listening here have as well. My particular story, played out over a number of years. I was raised in a very wonderful home in many ways. And my parents were faithful Christians. My father was Seventh-day Adventist minister, but he had been hit by a train when he was 8 years old, and he had a closed head injury. That closed head injury caused him to be, somewhat volatile. I look at him now as a hero, but back then I didn't understand why he had such a hard time and had such, emotional volatility at times. And that, began to increase when I got older because my personality was a little bit different than his. He is a musician and he was a melancholy, and I was kind of, gregarious and free-flowing. And those two personalities didn't really mesh too well. And so I began to get resentful, and I began to get angry. And of course, anger is something that is not a primary emotion. It's a secondary emotion. It comes from somewhere else. When you're angry, it just means that you've been hurt somewhere. And suppose you could say I was hurt and didn't even realize that or know that. And it really began to just fester. And then I began to actually turn against my father. He seemed oblivious to that because of, his how he related to everything. And that made me even more upset. And so, although I was always the life of the party, I began to get more and more sinister in my humor. and when I got out of the structure of education, when I was surrounded by lots of people, and went into the workforce, I began to encounter people at work. I was working as first of all, a psych technician and various things in the hospital, then ultimately a registered nurse. I began to encounter these people that would ask me questions that I was uncomfortable with because I was moving away from religion out of anger and bitterness, really. And they began to ask these questions, and I, being true to myself, would tell them, "Look, I'm not a Christian. I'm not attending church." And I remember one lady was asking me all these questions, and I found out she was an atheist and that she was about to die. She had a aortic aneurysm, and it was about to, you might say pop. It was about to give way. And so she was really on death's door, and she was asking me these questions. I started calling to work sick, so I didn't have to talk to her. I ran out of all my vacation time. I came in, I remember the last day that she was alive, and I was trying to sneak past her room, and one of the nursing assistants told me, "Look, she's got terrible pain." And I went in, and sure enough, she was, sweating, and she wasn't a surgical patient, and she was very fragile. And I called her attending, who offered, said to give her some medication. And then as she was dying, she asked me, she looked at me right in the eyes, one atheist looking at another atheist, and said, "Would you pray for me?"
Mm.
And I said, I hate to say it. I hate to tell you this, but I told her I don't pray, but I can call the chaplain. And there was a nurse in there. Her name was Dottie. And she jumped across the bed and she grabbed me by the neck. She kind of began to shake me and said, "You pray for this lady, or she's not the only person in here that's going to die." And so,
did she know your background?
Yeah, she did. And she was like, and so I prayed for the lady under duress. And so I prayed the lady, and her two sons were very prominent physicians, and they were friends of mine, and we were all kind of atheists together. And the one gave me, a $50 bill that was in his wallet and said, "Thanks for doing that." And that was too much for me. I said, I can't really work in an environment like this. And so I resigned, and I left the hospital, and I went to a far country. I went actually down to Venezuela. And so I went down there, and I was traveling around, and then finally I came back. I ran out of money, and so I came back. I started to get various jobs as a nurse. I could easily get a job because I was very good at getting jobs and whatever. But then once I would get in there, I would just have PTSD. I would remember this lady who died, and I would kind of have a panic attack, you might say. And then I would just say, "Well, I don't really want this job," and I'd leave. And I started doing that 3 or 4 times. And then I realized, you know what? I'm not going anywhere. I'm not able to do anything. I've got panic. I've got PTSD. I didn't even know it was called. And then I was walking on the beach on the eastern seaboard, and I decided, maybe my life wasn't worth living, and I decided to end my life.
Mm.
And so I started to concoct a plan, and I came up with a plan. And so then before I was going through with that, I said, I haven't been in touch with my mother in a long time. I better call my mother, because I was always very close to my mother. And I called my mother. She answers the phone. She accepts the reverse charges. And then she goes, "Donnie, I'm so glad you called." I said, well, thank you. Good to talk to you, Mom, And she goes, "I'm glad you," I said, "Why are you so glad that I called?" She goes, "Well, I'm worried I'm worried for your life. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I think someone's trying to kill you.
Wow.
And I said, who would that be? Now, I knew who it was,
Right.
I was very familiar with it. But she goes, it doesn't really matter, but I just feel impressed to tell you, you need to come home. You need to come home right now. I said, well, I don't think I want to, come home right now. You need to come home right now, And I don't even know if she remembers this conversation with all the detail that I do. So then I said, well, yeah, maybe I should. She goes, no, promise me you're going to come home. And I said, I can't really promise that. And then she started to cry. And then I said, okay, I'm coming home. I had no intention of going home. And so I got off the phone and then I went about my plan, and I had various substances and things that would make it easier to suppress my frontal lobe so I would go through with this plan. But as I started going about this plan, I began to think, okay, I just told my mother that I was going to come home, and then I don't come home, and let's say I die, and they're having the funeral, and they asked my mother, what was the last thing your son Donnie said to you? Well, he said he was going to come home, and he didn't come home. And I was like, that started going through my mind like a loop. And I said, I cannot do that to my mother. I can't do it. So even though I was not fit to drive, I began to drive home, and I was swerving my way home on Highway 75. And I don't know how many hundred of miles I went, but I went several hundred miles, and the thought struck me, for being so convinced that there's not a God, how is it that my mother knew that? How did my mother know that? I thought about that for a number of miles, and I came up with this unsavory idea that, well, I think there actually is a God, and God must have communicated that to my mother. And a song came to me from when I was a kid. Jesus loves me, this I know. And I actually knew it. I said, there must be a God, and he must care about me enough for that to happen. And that was a turning point. So, those folks that are listening today, I've been through these panic attacks, PTSD kind of stuff. And I know that sometimes because of relationships, because of anger, because of bitterness, because of resentment, because of, whatever the list is, you can get in a very dark place. And so the prayers of my mother saved me, you might say.
Wow. So you became an atheist, and then you had this experience. Let's fast forward. You become a minister. And how did you get involved in the depression anxiety program with Dr. Nedley in the very beginning?
Well, I'm a registered nurse, and after I came back, my life was spared. I went back to nursing, and then through a course of events, I started to take classes at the seminary, not because I wanted to be an Adventist, but because I wanted to discover whether or not I wanted to even be a Christian. And I went there, and I was convinced by going to the seminary and reading all the books that, I wanted to be a Seventh-day Adventist. And while I was there, some people asked me to teach a Sabbath school class for them when they were not there. I teach it and taught the class. The people loved it. And they said, you need to do this. And I was like, I'm not even a Christian. But so I started to get involved a little bit. And then ultimately I got a call into ministry, and I never put out a resume or anything, but I called into ministry. And the people that hired me were all, a lot of physicians in that church and stuff. And we started doing some health programs. And those health programs became so successful. A lot of people that were really turning around their heart disease, their diabetes, their hypertension, their obesity, all that kind of stuff, that 3ABN heard about it. And so they actually asked me to come and interview and tell what was happening. And I just took clips of people and what was happening in their lives. And this was so gripping that they started a show. They said, you need a show. So they started a show that I hosted called Health for a Lifetime. And it was that. The first guest they had for me to interview was Neil Nedley. And Neil Nedley was, I knew him from high school. He was 2 years ahead of me. I knew him from way back then. And we started to stay in touch. And that series of programs was one of the, most popular programs on 3ABN at that time. And this led to us to stay together. And then he started to see what we were doing, and he started to share what he was doing. And he started seeing patients in his practice that were very depressed, and he wanted to help them. And so one day he called me up and he said, what would you study with them? What would you cover with them? And I began to share with him, what I would do. And this led to us begin working together. And now we've worked together, I think, almost 20 years.
Wow. So he was in Oklahoma at the time, and then you would fly in and do what you're doing now as chaplain.
Right. Yeah. I would, I lived about 4 hours away from him, so I would drive down there. And at first it was just figuring out what to do. Both of us were figuring out what to do in real time.
Yeah.
And both of us grew. But he would always say, okay, he'd line me up to talk to all the patients. I'm not really sure I know what to say. And the only thing I could do is pray.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew prayer worked with depressed people because my mother's prayer. And I knew that the scriptures worked than they had for me. And I would just listen. And I got more and more sophisticated in how to listen. I used to try and use a bunch of stuff, what I would read from various books and counseling things. But then I kind of happened on the how to assess them using a series of questions. So I would ask, and this only happened in the last 3 years. For many years, I didn't know this. But I began to ask open-ended questions that would really lay bare the areas that they needed help in. And then, of course, I listened to everything, read everything Dr. Nedley wrote in his book, Depression, the Way Out, and then his first edition of Proof Positive. And he's done a number of books since then that are related to not only the physical problems people have, but also mental health problems. And it's kind of like, he was the right arm and I was the gospel. And we just began to work together and just see amazing things. God really, we're told that when a physician and a minister do not work together, that's the worst evil. But when they do work together, I don't know, that must be the greatest blessing.
I've had the privilege of shadowing you in the depression anxiety program. And every month, people come on this campus. They pay money to come on this campus. And it's nothing like I've ever seen before. You have the physician, Dr. Nedley, and his associates. So you have the medical, CBT counseling. And with the medical, you have the holistic approach. You have the diet, exercise. But then there's the spiritual component. You tell the story in your book, The Law and Its Logic. I read this book, highly recommend it, of an atheist that came to the program. And from time to time, people come to the program and they want the medical, they want the CBT, they want the nutritional, but the spiritual, they're like, I don't want that part. Could you tell us the story of this atheist that comes? He was kind of antagonistic, wasn't he, in the very beginning?
He was a very bright guy. He had advanced degrees in geology and physics. And people would, make million and billion dollar decisions based on his research of precious metals and different things. And when I first met with him, he said, I'm interested in this program all except for your part of it. And no disrespect for you, but I'm putting a lot of stock in the science of this program and the things I've heard, but not any stock in what you're saying. But here's a picture of the gun that I'm going to use to kill myself if this doesn't work.
Wow.
I said, you don't have that with you? No, he said, I don't have it with me. It's back in the, he lived in Europe. And I said, well, I'm relieved at that, and I'm glad that you are still with us. And, Dr. Nedley, when he talks to people say that kind of thing because he's not the only one that said that. He says, well, you look to be very confident in your atheism and your beliefs. Nothing you hear is going to shake you. It might be good for you to learn, low frustration tolerance, how to tolerate listening to someone like this. So he was in there begrudgingly, and he had his one of the more secular books of the program, and he's reading it, just wide open. He's reading it. He's not making any noise or anything, but he's just reading, and he's not listening at all. So this book tells the story of his journey. It's his journey and several other journeys in a composite person called Tom, but his is largely the story that's driving it. And he was not listening at all. When he would come to my appointments, I would talk about things that could easily have been secular instead of sacred. So I was trying to do what I could until one day we were singing, songs. And several years ago, I began to recognize that the hymns that we sing, many people don't know most of those, but they do know the Christmas songs. Before I get into the Christmas songs in a minute, every hymn in the hymn book is kind of like a depression recovery manual. Mm-hmm. It starts with a story of someone who was really depressed, and then they came out of it, like, oh, love that will not let me go, or Amazing Grace. Anyway, but then I decided I'm going to sing Christmas songs one night. So we're singing Christmas songs. I said, it's Christmas time at Depression Recovery, and everybody kind of laughs, nervously and awkwardly. And we're singing, and then we segue to a song, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. Well, this is a very famous song. It was written on the campus of Atlantic Union College, way back before that was Atlantic Union College. Anyway, and this song, singing the song, and in the middle of the song, I noticed that Tom, the guy, he just kind of looks up, and he just has this blank look on his face of shock. And I thought, I wonder what's happening with him. And then we go to that last verse, ye who are bending low under life's crushing load. I don't remember the words exactly. You toil on up the upward way with foots, whatever, feet that are slow or whatever. He just started crying. Not really verbally, but I could see tears coming down his eyes, and he was embarrassed, and he got up and he ran out. So he runs out of the room, and I go, man, I wonder what happened. So I finish my talk, and I go up, and he's there in the sunroom, and he goes, I said, what happened? And he goes, that song. That song. I said, you mean It Came Upon a Midnight Clear? He goes, yes. I said, that seemed to have an impact on you. He goes, the last time I sang that song, I was an altar boy in the church, and I was being abused by one of the priests. Wow. And that brought back all those memories, but it also brought them back in the setting of being here at Weimar, being at the Nedley Depression and Anxiety Recovery Program, and being surrounded by all kinds of people that seemed to really care about me. And I realized that guy was just a bad player. The fact that he would abuse me and then say we could pray and we could, say mass and get rid of everything that we had just done. That kind of wore old, and then I began to not believe it, and I rejected God, and I left, and I'd never been back. But I heard your story, and I know that you were an atheist, and you went through that, and I went through this. How did you come back? I want to know how to pray. I want to know how to connect with God again. I want to get in touch with God.
Wow.
And so that started a journey that led to, his accepting of Christ and his body, the church. Very powerful thing. And this repeats again and again in different levels, and it's amazing to see what God does through the power of testimony and through the power of simple songs. Don't think the hymns that you sing are busy work. But, what I've learned over time is also don't think that you can just sing them without explaining them. I have a lecture where I go through and I say, this is what the hymns do to your head and your science. The science, every part of your brain lights up. Here's how it works. But each one of them is moving from a depressing disappointment to a recovery. That's amazing. And so I tell all the staff, don't sing songs without telling the story. If you don't know the story, don't sing the song, because, so much is at stake.
I've heard the saying at the depression anxiety program, we love you until you can learn to love yourself. And so many times when people go to self-medication because of trauma, maybe it's because of abuse, there's feelings of guilt and shame that come with that. But you go through the Psalms, and you start out with Psalm 139, and it talks about the love of God. Why is that so important? Why is it so important in recovery from trauma or abuse, whatever it may be, to sense that there's a being that loves you unconditionally? I wanted to let you know that we'll be taking a short break during the summer, as this marks the end of season 1. It's really hard to believe. And if you want to find out more information about upcoming topics, guests, and the exact date when we'll start season 2, we want to invite you to our free Patreon account in the link below. We'll see you again in season 2. Now let's get back to our podcast.
Well, I mean, when someone's depressed and anxious, they're either thinking about the past in a negative way, and they maybe feel devalued, like they've lost their identity, or like they never heard, no one really cares about them. And they think, I'm feeling so bad, and there's supposedly a God. Why didn't he show up? Where is he? So they kind of even question God. Or maybe they're looking forward to the future with anxiety because they don't know, maybe another shoe's going to drop, right? So what I recognize in my own life, it was the love of my mother that saved me, right? But in the Psalms, this Psalm 139, actually a depression recovery patient one day shared one of those verses with me. And I was like, man, I need to look at that whole Psalm. And then I just realized this is a powerful paradigm that, if it can be believed, is true. And this is what I always talk about it in a very tentative fashion. If this was true, what would it do for your mental health, right? So I go through the Psalm in a rather Socratic fashion, and that is, I have them read it, and then I'll have them read a couple verses, and then I'll ask them questions about it. And I start with verse 13 through 16, which talks about how we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And then I ask them to read that verse, and I say, what's that saying to you? And of course they say, well, it's saying that we're created, we were put together. And I said, you don't have to believe that. I didn't believe that for years, but if you could that help your mental health? And then secondly, verse 1 through 6, O Lord, you search me and know me. You know my rising up and my sitting down. You understand my thoughts afar off, and you hedge me behind and before. So those verses, verse 1 through 6, are saying that not only did he fully form me, verse 13 through 16, he fully knows me. And he knows everything about me. If that's true, is that good for your mental health or not? It just depends. Some people, if they get information about you, they're going to do you in, right?
They know too much.
Yeah, they know too much. But I usually stop right there and say, you hedged me behind and before. And I talk about how one of my dogs got beat up by the pit bulls, and he was about to die. And we took him down to the vet, and the vet worked on him and gave him back to me. And I thought he was going to die. So I just laid down by that dog for 3 days. When he turned to the left, I turned to the left, right. And then the doctor called back, the vet called back and said, is your dog still alive? And I said, what do you mean? Is he still alive? Did you think he was going to die? And I said, and then the vet said, well, what did you do? I said, I just laid down with him the whole time because we had just spent $1,500 on this dog. I didn't want him to die, and I know my kids didn't want him to die. And the vet started to cry. And I said, why are you crying? And the vet said, that's what saved the dog's life. I said, what do you mean? He said, it was your love that saved the dog's life. He knew you wanted him to live.
Wow.
And then I just realized, so I tell that story along with those verses. And then next verses 7 through 12 says, Where can I go from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Hades, you're there. You know, and in other words, God follows us everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the story about how, you know, that can be, if someone's following you, it can be either good news or bad news. And I tell some stories about that. Well, anyway, those first three pictures of the pursuing love of God, the creating, the knowing and pursuing love of God, I just make the observation. I said, if someone knew that much about you, what would they think of you and why? And I say, you know, a lot of people that I asked that in the press program, they wouldn't think much of me because they know all that stuff about themselves and they're about ready to kill themselves. And I say, now these next two verses are the most important, verse 17 and 18. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God, how great is the sum of them. If I could count them, they'd be more in number than the sand. And when I awake, I'm still with you. And then we look at that very slowly. What's a precious thought? Mm-hmm. What does it mean there's all kinds of them? What is it saying? It says God knows everything about your creation, all your flawed genetics. He knows everything about what you think, whether it's good or bad. He knows where you've been, and it's not been good places. And yet with all that, he still has precious thoughts towards you. Mm-hmm. And it's at this time when people begin to realize that. We go very slowly through the psalm.
Yeah.
And they begin to realize the impact of that. I said, if that's true, what does that mean? And you'll see people start crying. They'll start to say, wow. And this is I wouldn't say unconditional love of God, because I think God met the conditions for love.
Sure.
But this is the love of God, really.
Yeah.
And they understand this. And when this begins to hit them, they see God in a whole new way. It's sometimes hard for them to accept it, but they see it. And, you know, the next few verses talk about, I hate those who hate you with holy hatred. And I said, what does that mean? And we talk about it, and the real meaning is, when you find someone that loved you that much, you want to fully defend them. They fully formed you. They fully know you. They fully follow you. They have precious thoughts to you. And because of that, you want to now defend them. Mm-hmm. And I just share, look, I used to hate God, but now I defend God because I feel like he loves me.
Wow.
And then finally, it's the last two verses. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So now the guy is saying, what? Because I know you love me, even though you know all these things, I'm asking you to search me even more, to know me, to see if there's anything I need to change, because I know you love me. I can trust you. You didn't desert me.
Yeah.
I can trust you, and lead me not just in the way, but the way everlasting. Mm-hmm. And this lays the foundation for, I would say, a therapeutic environment with everybody in the program. Mm-hmm. Because then they get in the sense that, you know, there's this body of Christ. There's this, you know, God group of people that are showing sacrificial love to them. Mm-hmm. You know, and we always talk about this as staff. It's not what we do that we normally do. It's what we do that we don't have to do that really gets people's attention. Mm-hmm. And that spirit of collective sacrifice, even though we know all the bad stuff, is an extension. I wouldn't even say it is the actual love of God poured through our hearts and us. It's not us. Mm-hmm. And so I think love is just, what's love got to do with it? It's got everything to do with it. Mm-hmm. And that's a paradigm shift. It was a paradigm shift for me. It's a paradigm shift for the people that go through that psalm. Mm-hmm. I'll have sometimes people that when they understand that psalm, they'll walk around. We have what's called the loop here. It's about a half mile. Mm-hmm. They'll walk around. They're just looking at that, and they're just looking at that, and then they'll say, "Do you think he really loves me?" Wow. I said, "No, I don't think he loves you. I know he loves you. Mm. I know it." You know, and that sense of love, it changes things.
Mm. It's foundational. And I love how you end in the application of vulnerability. When you realize that God loves you that much, you're like, search me. It's that trust, openness.
Search me, lead me, see if there's any wicked way
in me.
So when that happens,
disclosure.
When that happens, you know, they're able to ask those questions, maybe of their counselor, maybe of the physician, maybe of me, maybe of Scripture itself. And and that leads to another psalm which says, your way, O God, is in the sanctuary, right? So there's this idea of, okay, what is God's way? It's obvious I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic or I'm very angry or bitter. It's obvious my way is not working.
Right.
I've tried to commit suicide a number of times. I'm self-medicating. I'm doing this and that. How do I get out? What's the way out? See what I mean? So there's this openness. But the foundation has to be laid with sacrificial service and love.
You mentioned the gentleman in your book that was an atheist, and he experienced trauma from a priest, religious entity. And could it be that the reaction in some regard is because Christianity hasn't demonstrated the love of God?
Absolutely. So, when I go through the 10 Commandments in the book, the last 6 commandments, the last 5, I'm not satisfied with life, so I'm coveting things.
Yeah.
I'm telling myself lies. I feel like I've been stolen from or abused.
Taken advantage of. Yeah.
That's that.
Yeah.
And I feel like my intimacy has been adulterated.
Yeah. Don't
commit adultery.
Right.
I feel like I want to kill myself or someone else.
Right.
Because why? Honor thy father and thy mother. An authority figure, a church figure, a priest, a pastor, a politician,
or
parent, they messed up. And because they messed up in that role, I'm not satisfied. I feel like they lied to me. I feel like they took advantage of me, and maybe they did. I feel like I've been, corrupted, and I'm angry, I'm resentful, I'm bitter. And so then there's all these self-medications. I'm going to cut myself. I'm going to drink alcohol. I'm going to have sex with all kinds of people. I'm going to watch pornography. I'm going to doom scroll, whatever. All those things are really symptoms. And they're not things to be, oh, you bad person. They're things, they're a cry for help. And they're turned to because this authority figure messed up. So they're not going to turn to God, and they're not going to turn to someone that represented God, because what did he do to them?
Right.
So they try all these other things.
Right.
And so they have to have a reframing of God through a new representative. And that's you, that's me, that's whoever. And we want to represent God as a loving father, not as an abusive, manipulative, exploitive father. And I think that's the problem in Christianity today. We have a huge problem where, Christianity is getting a bad name because the authority figures that are driving it many times within the church or within the secular culture are just not nice people.
Right.
So, yeah.
Or they violate trust.
Right.
And I like how you brought out that those are symptoms, because many times when people think of Christianity or religion, maybe their experience has been where there's been a lot of shaming for those types of activities that people go to for self-medication. But in reality, if you go to the why do people feel the need to numb themselves?
Yeah.
To go to those things. Like you said, it's really a cry for help.
And it's pain.
It's pain.
It's pain, and it's shame, and it's, guilt. Sometimes people are ashamed by what they did. Sometimes people are ashamed by what was done to them or what they allowed.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, I am shame.
Yeah.
And they give up on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And because they keep trying to tread water with these self-medications, and they ultimately don't work.
Yeah.
They're going down. So that's why the first 5 commandments are the solution to the pollution, right? This is depression. The first 5 commandments are recovery. And this is one of the most powerful discoveries I ever made. It's right there. It's very obvious once you see it.
Yeah.
But the first 5 commandments are really delivery. So I'll ask people, have you ever escaped from a bad situation? One guy said, no, I never escaped from anything. And then he started thinking about it, came back down the hall. He goes, well, I was in a I was in a bar in Alaska and I ran out of money and I went to get some more money to drink some more, but I got tired and it was cold outside and it was really below zero and I laid down and I went to sleep. And one of my friends in the bar came out looking for me and I was under a bunch of snow because it had snowed. And for some reason he thought that maybe it was me and he pushed it and it was me. Do you think that was a deliverance? I said, absolutely it was a deliverance. So then I try and help people connect with the times in their life where they escaped a situation. Maybe it has a divine element. I don't even say divine element because I don't want to turn them off to God.
Sure.
Have you ever been given a second chance? That's mercy. That's the second commandment.
Yeah.
And have you ever, because of those two, do you out of gratitude want to stay within the structure of God's will, his way? Or do you want to go your own way? And they say, man, I'm really trying to go his way now because of gratitude. And then, well, do you have days of celebration? Every day do you celebrate gratitude, and every week, that's the Sabbath. And then do you have a purpose? Now back to the fifth commandment. Once you see that God has delivered you, given you a second chance, has a structure where you can thrive and you can celebrate every day and every week, then, well, I want to represent God as my heavenly parent, as the one who delivers and all this stuff rather than what I was shown.
Right.
And now their purpose in life is to do that. And then they're helping those who are not satisfied and all that stuff. So discovering that, that was so powerful to me. I realized the 10 Commandments themselves are like a depression recovery program. Depression recovery. And, you know, the cherry on top of that is the first 5 commandments. Those are the recovery commandments. They all have the name Yahweh Elohim, Lord God, associated with them. In other words, God doesn't even want to associate with these negative ones.
Right.
He associates fully with the commandments of deliverance. This revolutionized my counseling because I realized what I need to do is help assess people using the 10 Commandments and treat people using the 10 Commandments as well. And once you start, you know, sensing God's deliverance, that he gives you a second, all that stuff on this category, you start to not just get high, you get most high, you know, because you go, whoa, man, God did this. And you have a sense of awe.
Right.
And we know that sense of awe resets a person's default mode network in their brain. Their self-talk, the narrative about how bad they are and stuff, it can reset it because you're just in awe. Well, look at what God did. He got me out. Whoa. And, you know, we try and create awe here at the DR program. We have the musical concerts. We take them on these hikes by waterfalls and stuff, and they're just like, whoa. And the heavens declare the glory of God. And people are singing, and they're just like, whoa. And what they're doing is resetting that default mode network in their brain. They're resetting that narrative. And then the stories we tell, the testimonies they hear, that's re-scripting things. And it's beautiful. So it's the best thing ever, really.
It is. It is. I mean, when I would hear the stories of the trauma that people experienced, it just broke my heart. You can see why people self-medicate just to deal with the pain. And what I'm hearing you say is that really depression, anxiety, all of those things is a result of breaking God's law. That's really the effect, all of the trauma that people experience. Let's talk about anger. You talk about anger in your counseling, and there's a pretty, if I can say it, crazy psalm when you read it. It's Psalm 109.
Well, Psalm 109.
That psalm, this brother's,
he's angry.
He's livid. And you're like, I've shared this psalm, and people are like, that's in the Bible?
Exactly.
But take us through that psalm, because that was so insightful what you bring out about anger.
Well, anger, of course, is one of the things that some people say anger is depression turned inward, right? Or depression is anger turned inward. So when someone's angry, I'm always hopeful because I realize there's something to work with there. They're not totally apathetic. They're angry. So in that psalm, it shows a person that's very angry, and it goes through like 5 stages. And it says, look, I'm so angry, I'm going to turn him over to the a court. I hope that his kids are not taken care of. I hope his wife is beat up. I hope even his parents are getting run over by a truck. It's basically saying
His children are fatherless.
Right. It's just like all this stuff, and you're going, it can't get worse. It can't get worse, but it just gets worse and worse. And finally he says, I want oil in my enemy's bones. So he's like, I want to stick something in his bones, and I want to put boiling oil. And I always ask people, have you been that angry? Have you been that angry? Have you been that angry? It's kind of a looking at how angry, and most people never get to that level.
Right.
But some people do, and they're very angry. And then I say, okay, now I want you to read the Psalm again and see if you can figure out why he's angry. Because I draw a little chart. It's not new with me. This is, people know this about anger. It's a secondary emotion. So anger is always secondary. Now, if you don't get rid of anger, your frontal lobe's not going to work. You're not going to be able to work through anything. So you got to work through it with people. But I asked them, why is it that they're angry? And then I think it's verse 20, 21, or 22, something like that. Right in there it says, because I am needy and my heart is wounded within me. So really, there is something that happened. Same with me in my testimony. I was wounded. I got angry and I was wounded because I didn't feel like my father cared about me. He did. But he just had a rough assignment himself, right? So figuring that out is very important for a person. So we go through that. We try and figure that out. And then what to do with it. The Bible says, be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down in your wrath. So anger is a positive emotion too, but it can't be long lasting. And so how do you get there? Well, Psalm 4, verse 4 through 8, it talks about, be angry and do not sin. Offer the sacrifices. Go to your room and meditate in your heart. So in other words, go to a safe place, maybe in your room where you have a mattress, and then offer the sacrifices of righteousness. You can't handle it. Turn the anger over to the sanctuary system. Turn it over to where God can handle it. And he had these sacrifices about things that have been done wrong to you to make it right. So hand it over. Let him work on that. And as he works on that in the sanctuary, as you hand it over to him, he doesn't minimize what's making you angry. He doesn't say it's not important.
Sure.
He has a whole system to work on it. Right. And he works on it. And it's very public. And there's songs and there's liturgy and there's priest and there's everything else. And it goes on and on. And he even has a final atonement, the Day of Atonement. You have daily atonement and then the final atonement, where he's really taking it seriously. I think this is so important for people to know that God really is working on it. Yeah. And, vengeance is not theirs. It's God's. Hand it over to him. It doesn't mean that the people that you hand over to him will not be dealt with. They will be dealt with.
There'll be justice.
Right. You were a righteous God and yet an avenger of their deeds, it says in Psalm 99. So he's going to take care of it. You got to trust his process. And then what happens when you do that, it says, I will lay down in peace. I will wake up in gladness, because you've handed it over. And that process is rolling. So in our depression recovery, we have a burning where we symbolically are doing that. What was the first thing in the sanctuary? It was a fire. Yeah. And so, we were thinking one day, years ago, Dr. Nelly and I said, we got these people that are somewhat secular and whatnot. Yeah. They don't understand maybe all the Bible stories. Why don't we just have a burning? Let's burn up the things that were bad, the things that hurt us, the pain and all that stuff. Yeah. Some people say that's a turning point for them. Yeah. They write out what's bad, and then I give them an assignment, a counterintuitive assignment. I say, okay, write out all the bad things. We're going to burn those on Wednesday night. But I also want you to make now a list of things that are good coming out of the bad. Yeah. What did you learn coming out of that bad situation that actually you can see as good? Yeah. And they don't have to have a long list, maybe 2 or 3 things, but suddenly now their mind, instead of going to why they think it was bad, they're thinking about, wait a minute, I learned something there I never could learn any other way. And their mind is able now to shift. So that's kind of my process. And of course it takes on nuances. If it's a husband that's mad at a wife, right, I usually give him an assignment from Ministry of Healing called Builders of the Home. And I say, underline all the things in there you think is wrong with you. Not your wife, but you. And I say the same thing to the wife.
Mm-hmm.
And they're beginning to identify the things that come between them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the things that make them angry and whatnot. But they come together now in a mode of saying, I'm sorry for what I did. And the other one says, I'm sorry for what I did. And when they start doing that, then they start coming together. Mm-hmm. And they get to move past that anger that had crippled them for so long.
Mm-hmm. You talk about this idea in Psalm 77, and I brought it with me. I wanted to read a few lines from this and give you an opportunity to comment. It says here, verse 2, Psalm 77, verse 2, in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord, and my soul refused to be comforted. Verse 3, I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and was overwhelmed. Verse 4, thou holdest my eyelids waking, insomnia. And it goes down here, starts asking questions. Will God cast me off forever? Has his mercy gone forever? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? And then in verse 10, it says, this is my anguish, or this is my infirmity. You describe how this is like the lowest point you can go.
Yeah.
You know, this is a person that's depressed. They're questioning God.
Yeah.
Insomnia. But there's a turn in this.
Yeah.
There's a turn in this. And you emphasize like, I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
Unpack that for us.
Okay. So Psalm 77 was shown to me by a depressed person. Everything I know, everything I know was taught to me usually by a patient.
Yeah.
I don't take credit for this, but I take credit for listening and what God was doing through that Psalm in one person's life. I said, is there anything that gives you any hope? And they said Psalm 77, and they read one of the verses. And I began to look at that, and I realized the first 10 verses are the steps down into depression. Mm-hmm. I cried to the Lord, I cried in the night, and, He comforted me, but I refused to be comforted. Mm. So one of the steps down into depression is to give up on God for whatever reason and to refuse His comfort. He is the God of all comfort, it says in Corinthians.
Right.
But you can refuse it. So a person refuses it, then what happens? They start to complain, they question, and they just keep going down that journey of verse 1 through 10. So they complain, they start to blame God for their insomnia, they start to have questions about God. Will He cast off forever? Will His mercy cease? And these are all things that you just wouldn't think about God, but that's what a depressed person begins thinking. But it starts with that choice to refuse comfort, and it goes down, 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 until finally they say, this is my anguish. I'm here. This is my infirmity. I'm alone. Mm-hmm. Nobody cares at all. I'm at the bottom. Yeah. Now, Archives of Internal Medicine had an article years back, and I put in these questions. What did they do to a person's, mentality? It says, if you're asking those kind of questions, has God cast me off? Does He not care? That increases your mortality up to 30%.
30%.
Just even asking those questions.
Wow.
So the person comes down and they're all the way down at the bottom. Okay, they're at the bottom. And that's where people are when they come to the depression anxiety reprogram. I'll ask them how satisfied they are with life. Some people say like 0 out of 10.
Yeah.
Or 3 out of 10. They're done. Mm-hmm. And they know they're done. Their relatives know they're done. Someone knew they were done. That's why they're here. Mm-hmm. And they're paying, a sizable amount of money to get help. Really not anywhere near what it should be cost, but they're doing that. And it's right then that I make this big point. The Psalm does not end in verse 10.
Yeah.
It has this key word, but. I'm thinking of making a t-shirt that just says, but. B-U-T, but. And I say, what does that mean? It means however.
Yeah.
Well, then it has the steps up, and it has an elegant picture of 5 I will statements. Mm-hmm. I'll remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I'll remember His wonders of old. I'll remember His works, and I will, meditate on His wonders, and then I will talk of His deeds. This is a picture of a brain getting better. I will remember. That's the hippocampi on each side.
Mhm.
I'll remember the use of the right hand of the Most High. In other words, he helped me with his right hand. I'm going to remember those times.
Mhm.
And then I'll remember his wonders. That's that sense of awe. These verses are actually resetting the default mode network in the brain.
Mhm.
They're telling stories that show that God cared about the whole world.
Right.
I brought you out with my right hand, and then and then the wonders. That's the sense of awe, the flood, the creation, and I will talk of your deeds, and I will meditate. To meditate means to grunt. And when you see something God did that's so powerful, you go, whoa, check that out.
Mm.
And you start, when your brain gets better, you start seeing that.
Mhm.
Like today, I just was talking to a depressed patient today, and I began to show him, he goes, wow.
Mm.
And he was just like, and he was, meditating right in front of me.
Yeah.
This is healthy meditation. This is
Right.
not meditation that is trying to empty your brain by
Right.
what you do. It's emptying your brain by seeing what he has done.
Mhm.
And when you meditate on what he has done, it starts to displace what, is causing you to be undone.
Mhm.
And this is what happens with those I will statements.
Mhm.
And then it goes into case studies. It has a huge one in verse 13. It says, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Remember that, where search me, O God, and try me and see if there's any wicked way. Well, it says, no, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. So I just stopped right there and I draw a picture of the sanctuary. I said, what does that mean? And I began to break it down. God led 1.5 million people out of depression from Egypt. And that's why you have exit signs everywhere all around us in every building. You can't even tell a better story than that in every continent of the globe.
Mhm.
This is a huge story. God led all these people out.
Mhm.
And, the Passover, and then through the Red Sea, and then the fire by night and the bread by day, every day, the manna, the intercession of Moses going up and down the mountain for them, and then they received God's law. That's the Exodus.
Mhm.
And it's told in a building, and the building is a house, and it's saying, I want to come down with my house
Mhm.
and help you out.
Mhm.
I want to bring you out of the bad.
Mhm.
So it moves from depression to recovery.
Mhm.
So that's a case study. Then after that, it has these Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and Aaron.
Mhm.
These are all case studies of people that really had issues.
Mhm.
I like to tongue in cheek say Joseph had some issues.
Mhm.
He got these dreams, which were for him, but he told his brothers about them.
Mhm.
He says, "Look, you're going to bow down to me." That's kind of
Mhm.
low EQ. then he gets another dream and he does it again, and then he wonders why they sell him down the road. But anyway, he learned that later on when he met his brothers. He wasn't like that.
Mhm.
He didn't tell them everything he was thinking.
Sure.
He learned his lesson. But in learning his lesson, he saved himself, saved his father, saved all of them. So that's a case study.
Mhm.
Jacob, he was a supplanter. He was a cheater. He had a distorted relationship with his mother
Mhm.
and lied to his father and his
Mhm.
brother.
Mhm.
He had problems,
Mhm.
right? But he too worked through those and he became a prince with God, and he worked through those things in the same kind of journey.
Mhm.
And then you have Moses,
Yeah.
he killed somebody,
Yeah.
and he had to go on a depression recovery program for 40 years.
Mhm.
And then you got Aaron. He succumbs to the Golden Cafe Church. He's like, he does all the immorality and everything else,
Right.
but he's called that saint of the Lord at the end of it, and he comes out of it. When people see that, when they see that, wait a minute, I see how I refused comfort
Yeah.
and I went down to the dregs,
Yeah.
but then I can see a process out
Mhm.
where I can ground myself not in what I can do, but what he did.
Mhm.
These I will statements are looking at what God's will was in terms of deliverance.
Mhm.
And they begin to look at that, and then they see the case studies and they see the sanctuary, this revolution. People love that psalm. They begin to see themselves in it.
Right.
They see themselves in it. One guy, just this last week, I just baptized him 2 days ago.
Mhm.
He said, I finally figured it out. I had refused comfort,
Wow.
and now my life has changed.
Wow.
What changed his life was that psalm. This psalm is such a powerful psalm.
Yeah. You mentioned the sanctuary. Is the sanctuary an illustrative model of the path out of depression and anxiety, as you say?
Absolutely.
How does it play it out? Do you just do a sketch of it?
Well, I usually
10,000 feet.
I usually draw out the sanctuary and I go through it 4 times very rapidly with our people. And I have them sing before they do this. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land, which is the song. That song is all about the sanctuary.
Yeah.
So then I draw it out and begin to explain it. That God's people were in bondage there. And he said, I want to bring you out. So they had to come out, and the first thing they did was sacrifice a lamb, to get out, and they had the blood over the doorpost, and that's the Passover. So that's memorialized in the sanctuary by that altar of sacrifice. The next thing that happened was they went through the Red Sea. That's memorialized by the laver. So they went through the Red Sea and then got them out. That was miraculous.
Right.
Their life was spared, and then they went through the Red Sea. That was miraculous. And then after that, they went to where Moses had been in his own personal journey, and where he had seen the burning bush. And then they see the burning bush memorialized as the lampstand, and they say, "Oh, wait, that's the next step." And God wants to provide us light therapy. Okay, so in our program we have light therapy that resets the circadian rhythms.
Right.
In our program we have the laver, we have hydrotherapy, and we ultimately have baptism available.
Right.
In our program we have a fire where they can burn the past.
Right.
So fire, water, light therapy, and then nutrition therapy. You have the bread, right? And it's interesting that the bread and the almonds and the manna itself was made out of coriander seed. Coriander seed was actually anti-anxiety, and the almonds and whatnot, they have the omega-3s and stuff they're missing. It's almost like the sanctuary is telegraphing some of the elements that we have in our depression recovery program. Then there's prayer. Prayer is huge in terms of, if you believe you can pray, or you believe people's prayers make a difference. Like my mother, she prayed for me. I got home and I said, how did you know about she goes, my friends and I pray for you all the time. And it's kind of like in Daniel, all of his friends were praying and they would get answers to prayer. That's that altar of incense. So prayer. And then finally, Moses goes up, and he receives the law of God. And I just showed you how the law of God is a depression recovery program itself. So ultimately, you're going from depression and captivity, and you're moving to recovery. And you're crossing the Jordan. You're going into the promised land. So entering in from east to west, as far as the east is from the west, you are moving towards recovery. So the sanctuary is the ultimate depression recovery program. This particular program I'm in just today, we're finishing up. We have one every month here.
Yeah.
It's the coolest thing because we're nonstop seeing this happen again and again with our students, with our staff, and we're seeing people come. Anyway, one couple was so excited. They said, "We always want to know about the sanctuary. This makes so much sense." And they just love it. It's a paradigm of peace, Great peace have they which love thy law, and in nothing shall they offend, or nothing shall offend them in that. So it's moving from lawlessness to restoration. Powerful.
I've had the privilege of being your backup. And I tell you, it is one of the most transformative things I've ever experienced in ministry. And every component of it, I believe, is a synergy where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts when it all comes together.
That's so true.
Yeah. And I believe the spiritual component is so critical. You talk about this passage in Ezekiel chapter 18 that really touched my heart, where there's a proverb in Israel. The parents have eaten sour grapes, and the kids' teeth are on edge.
Yeah.
And I want to speak to someone out there. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's an authority figure, and they've been abused. Trauma. Unpack that. That really spoke to me when you when you explained this proverb in Israel, because what it brings out is there's generational trauma.
Yeah.
Because of what the parents did.
Yeah.
The kids are the ones that suffer.
Right. The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the teeth of children are set on edge. And God says, I don't like that proverb in Israel. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. In other words, I want you to move away from letting your parents influence you so much. You're your own person. I read this when I came back after being an atheist. And when I read this, it gave me so much hope. I can have my own experience. It doesn't have to be my dad's. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist minister now. I never would have ever guessed that.
Right.
But this is what helped me to do that, because I could separate my experience from his experience. And while recognizing the impact it had. Now down in verse 14, it says, the way you get out of it is you see all the things, see all the sins your father has committed. You consider them, but you don't have to do likewise.
Right.
And I was like, wow, look at that. How freeing that was.
Yeah.
And then I was reading later in Jeremiah, and Jeremiah 31:29 through 34, it has the same passage. The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the teeth of the children are set on edge. I don't like that proverb, don't like it, but it has a different punchline.
Yeah.
The punchline is not see it, consider it, and don't do likewise, which can be pretty self-focused and works-oriented, and you really can't change that. It's harder to say that than do that, right? But here it's totally different. It says, has like 7 I will statements. I will write my law in your heart and mind. I will write my law in your heart. I will write my heart in your heart. I will be your God. You will be my people. No one will have to tell his neighbor, because everyone will know me, and I will remember your sin and your iniquity no more. So it's like 7 I will statements, and all of them are focused on what God will do.
Mm-hmm.
And you begin claiming the promises. Okay, write your law there. All right. I see that you love me. I see that you care for me. All these things come together, and it gives you this new covenant experience. Actually, the word new in Hebrew is renew. Mm-hmm. So you have this renewed experience. And this is the largest quotation from the Old Testament to the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's in Hebrews 8. It's in Hebrews 10.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest deal from both Testaments. And that is that it's not what you can do.
Right.
It's what God says he will do if you let him do it.
Right.
And this is transformative to people when they see that.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing I show people is I show people how their brain develops. Mm-hmm. When you do something as a parent, it doesn't affect you as much as it affects your kids.
Yeah.
You don't even maybe think it affects them. But your kids are going through a time right then when their brain is developing, and they're very relational, and they're not cognitive. They're very relational, and you are blowing up their world. Right. But ultimately, your kids, your brain begins to mature and whatnot, and you can process things more. But when I show people that and show them where they are and what's happening, parents begin to say, wait a minute, I need to say I'm sorry. I need to redeem the time. Kids begin to say, wait a minute, I need to listen to my parents because I really do need their help. But this what would you say, petri dish of understanding and forgiveness and of how the generations work and how, God is there. It says in Isaiah 63, verse 9, in all their afflictions he was afflicted. He came down into a family with serious abuse, trauma, and everything he ever went through. And then by trusting his Father, he was able to get through it. And he can help you through it. That's great news.
Last question. There's someone out there, maybe they're contemplating suicide, depressed, anxious, maybe they've been abused, trauma. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say if you've listened this long in the podcast, I hope you found something that's giving you hope. And I would just remind you that there are many people that have been where you are. I'm one of them. And God had a purpose and plan that I did not see. And and he intervened in my life. And I believe maybe even listening to this podcast is helping him intervene in your life. And don't lose hope. So the very first thing we talk about the first night when people come to our program is hope. And hope is made up of two things. It's the will to live and it's the way to live. And you may not have the will to live, but someone else does. Someone else loves you. Maybe it's your mother. Maybe it's other people. And maybe you don't even know. And if you don't know, I would tell you this. God loves you for sure. And there's other people that love you. I didn't even know it. All these people praying for me, right? So that will to live is not enough, though. You need to understand the way to live. And that way to live, there's very tangible things that we cover in our program. Some of them you've heard today. Even that Psalm 77. It's a path. That sanctuary message is a path. I'd encourage you to, call the Nedley Depression Recovery Program and, get assessed. There's community programs that are literally around the world. You can take part in that. You can watch a bunch of things on the internet with Dr. Nedley and myself, and even with Dr. Shin. You can hear some of these testimonies. So you can start right now. And then if you're able, come in association with people who have been down that path, been down that journey. There's nothing I love more than helping people with depression and anxiety, because I've been there. And I know what you're going through as much as one person can enter into another. And one day I was talking to a guy here recently, and he goes, I don't believe in God. He was there for about 5 days with us. And I said, well, did you like the massage? Yes. Did you like the nutrition? I loved it. Did you like the counsel? Yeah, they were so compassionate and caring. I said, let me tell you something. In the Bible, it says that Christ has a body, and that's his body ministering to you. And think about your life. Who is it that has demonstrated care, physical care, emotional, mental care ever in your life? Think about those. Think about those people. God cares for you. He loves you. He's trying to put you together with people that can help you, and he can lead you, and he can guide you. And we've seen it so many times. Don't wait. Make a phone call, or have someone make a phone call for you, and help. It's like, I remember this guy he was a maintenance man in my church, and he had a great phone message on his phone. And when you called him, he goes, I can't answer right now, but I know your number and I'm on the way. And this is how God is. He's on the way. He's on the way. It may look like he's hiding himself, but he's there. I know it. And I know from personal experience. And he's got a bunch of people that love him and love you too.
Thank you so much, Pastor Don, for sharing. It's touched my heart, and I know it'll minister to many people that have watched. We want to thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for supporting and for praying for this ministry and this podcast. As mentioned before, we'll be taking a short break during the summer. And if you have suggestions about what topics you'd like to see in the future, be sure to join our Patreon account in the link below. See you in Season 2.